mix of native speaker norms? That's a question for TEFLologists. Is it better to focus on form or to focus on forms? That's a question for TEFLologists. If you use a textbook, is your classroom authentic, or should your approach be more learner-centric, from feedback to learner autonomy? We'll discuss it all on TEFLology. Welcome back to the TEFLology Podcast. Today, we bring you the first of 3 episodes recorded live at the beginning of August in 2020. We were emailed by some people who wanted to appear on the podcast, and we decided to do a trial live episode with a variety of guests and listeners. In the first episode, which you'll hear today, we speak to Helen McIntyre, who is a Celta trainer, and we give a little more information about her and her work in the recording itself. Please enjoy the episode.
Hi, this is Matthew.
This is Rob.
This is Matt.
This is Mark.
This is Helen.
This is Sadok.
And welcome back to the TEFLology Podcast, a podcast all about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters. Presented by 7 self-certified TEFLologists.
Okay, and we should probably explain if you're listening to this live, this shouldn't need an explanation. But if you're listening to the recording of this podcast, today is our first pilot episode of TEFLology Live, and we're doing this via Zencastr. We can only hear people's voices. We can't see anyone's face or camera. And the idea about today's episode is it's going to be kind of a call-in episode, like a phone-in radio show. So we've got a couple of pre-planned guests lined up that we're going to go and talk to soon. We also have another group of listeners that are listening to us as this goes out at the moment. And yeah, we'd encourage anyone to, if you'd like to contribute to our conversation, to join this chat, maybe in a future recording, and yeah, join in the conversation. Okay, so that's a bit of background about what we're going to be doing today. Rob and Matt, do you want to add any other comments to that?
Well, we have 2 guests, as you mentioned. Both of the guests contacted us via email and asked to be involved in the podcast, and we thought that maybe this would be a good way to, bring in some fresh blood, some new voices to discuss and maybe get through a few different topics. So a slightly different format, not just the 3 of us rambling on as usual, but instead a variety of voices on a variety of topics.
Yeah, and I think obviously the situation, the COVID, the pandemic situation has kind of led us to this point, because where we commonly record podcasts with kind of people that are close to us in Japan, I guess this new situation has kind of meant that we've kind of opened ourselves up to kind of using this kind of online system a bit more. So it's created new opportunities. So yeah, that's kind of why we're doing this, I guess.
So shall we bring on our first guest?
Oh, another thing I want to say as well is that one of the other reasons this came about, is that we've recently received quite a few emails from people getting in contact with us asking if they could contribute to the show in some way, and we'd never really thought about kind of the right way to go about this. So one idea we had was to bring everyone together in this live episode. So that's why we have 2 pre-planned guests today. So shall we speak to our first guest?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sure. So our first guest is Helen McIntyre, who contacted us about teacher training during the time of COVID, although I'm sure she can talk about other topics too. But I guess we'll start with our traditional interview first question, which is Helen, first of all, welcome.
Hello.
Yep. And if you could just tell us a little bit about your background as a teacher and a teacher trainer.
Yeah, sure.
Well, thanks for having me. So as you can tell, I'm British. Living in Canada, Montreal at the moment. I actually started my teaching journey as a high school teacher back in Scotland, and then moved to Canada, and I took on the Celta and became a teacher of English. And over 5, 6 years, I then decided I would take the Delta. And once I had that, I got the opportunity to become a teacher trainer. So I did the trainer course, and I have been a Celta trainer for the last year, which is fun.
Hmm. Great. Something you contacted us about was specifically so this transition to online teaching or emergency remote teaching. And so, what are sort of could you talk a little bit about that transition first of all?
Yeah, sure. I think my situation is very similar to a lot of teachers at this time. We, shut down in March and just got flung into an online situation. Um, and we didn't all have a lot of experience. I think I'd had experience with using Skype for one-on-one lessons, which is very different from teaching 20 students in a Zoom classroom with a textbook that I could not really access for a while.
Yeah.
So a lot of it was learning on the job for sure, like a lot of teachers, I think, at this time. But I think it's a really good way to learn, actually. I feel like quite a good teacher online now compared to 4 months ago where I, was struggling pretty much every day.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
Did you have any sort of background in using technology in your teaching?
Oh no, I'm not a technology person at all. No, I mean
Mm.
it's amazing you can hear me right now. I computers often just crash when I go near them. So no, I definitely would not class myself as that at all. But I actually would say that I'm becoming more interested in it now, and I can see the benefit of it. I think previously I didn't see the benefit of online teaching. I thought face to face was the perfect form of teaching. But I
Mm.
can see benefit now in even when we do return to normality at some point. I can see benefit of having online or blended forms of learning, um, and still being very beneficial for learners. Yeah.
Mm.
Helen, you're currently at the moment you're doing your teacher training remotely,
Yeah.
but is the type of training you're doing still very much focused on classroom-based teaching, or has that also changed to
Well, yeah.
remote
So
teaching?
I'm doing. I'm a teacher trainer of the Celta course, sort of the
Mhm.
Cambridge course for teaching English. And I mean, there's no difference in terms of what we're teaching them to do.
Yeah.
We're still teaching them the same frameworks of lessons, how to assess students, how to do needs analysis. The assignments are all the same. We just have to kind of tweak them a little bit and sort of, they have to do PowerPoint presentations and they have to adapt a little bit of how to present language, using whiteboards online and things like that. But we're not making it overcomplicated. We're not giving them a platform and giving them an excess of tools to use online, because we just want
Mhm.
them to get the basis of teaching so that they can apply that to, they can continue using online, or they can move into the face-to-face classroom and transition easily with the same tools that they had during the course. So the
Right.
idea is
Okay.
that it's the same, this assessment is the same. It doesn't matter if you get your CELTO in 2020 online or you got it in
Mm.
2015 face to face. It's the same course.
Right. Okay. I see.
Mhm.
You mentioned earlier that some of the things that you're doing now in terms of online teaching may influence your teaching when you can go back into the classroom.
Mhm.
And similarly with the Celta, for example, do you see the situation having long-term effects on how the Celta is structured?
I think it depends on the school, um, wherever the course is being held. But I think,
Mhm.
yeah, I think there will be some changes for sure.
Mm.
I think it's given us this opportunity to teach people teach people to teach, to train people all over the world, and they don't have to come all the way to Montreal to do everything, and it's a big expense and they have to take a whole month off work to come and do this. But here, the way we're running it in my school is very much part-time. So we've extended the course. It's not in the 4 weeks as it usually is face-to-face. We do it over a longer period of time. And it's much more asynchronous, which gives them opportunity to learn at their own pace and to do the assignments, over a longer period of time. They have more time to plan their lessons. And I think that gives a lot of opportunity we have, the trainees themselves are from all over the world, and also the students we bring in for their, teaching practice are also all over the world. So it's really extending the course.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Can you talk, maybe again going back, can you talk a little bit about some of the benefits that you have noticed from online teaching?
Just in general online teaching or teacher training?
Online teaching. It sounded, when you were talking earlier, it sounded like you were maybe started out somewhat skeptical or just, understandably worried about how it's all going to work.
Yeah.
But it seems like you've had a fairly positive experience so far.
Yes, I have, but I think more just because I got used to it rather than anything else. I did a couple of online courses for fun because I'm that kind of nerd. And yeah, I see there are things that we can do with them. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you do that's the same. You just adapt how you do it, like you can still do group work. You can still assess them one-on-one, even if you're in a class. Yeah, there's just so many things you can do that are the same. You just have to change how you do it slightly. You have to think about if I'm putting them in a breakout room, for example, on Zoom, or how I'm using the whiteboard, or how am I sharing the resource with them, if it's on an online platform, or if I'm sharing it by email or something like that. So I think there's a lot of transferable skills between online and in face-to-face situations, which I think that's how I've created this positive attitude is just thinking, like, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, I'm just applying skills that I already knew into online teaching and hoping for the best.
Helen, can I ask how does I actually didn't do the Celta, I did the Cert TESOL, but I imagine it's the same with the Celta. Rob, you did the Celta
I did.
many moons ago.
He sounds really enthusiastic about that.
But obviously there's some practical. There has to be some practical
Yeah.
not classroom teaching. How does it work with getting the students? Because when I did my Cert TESOL, it was kind of a mixed bag of students that they could find in the local community. How does it work with how you're doing your training?
Yeah, it's kind of the same. If it's face to face, we put out adverts for students to come in, and we don't always get as many. But with online, I mean, we put out the call to get students for the training practice, and we got like 200 responses within a day. It was ridiculous.
Wow.
So in that respect, it's online is really good because the trainees will always have students. Yeah.
Yeah. Rob, I mean, you did the Celta. Rob, do you have any questions related to your experiences on the Celta?
Well, I was interested, not so much a question, more a comment. The most dreaded thing at like a conference. But the point you just made, Helen, about getting lots of students who can sort of participate in the practicums. I remember when I was doing my Celta face to face, all of we had like a group of about 10 students, and they were there for the first few days, and then they all disappeared. And we found out that another school up the road was doing like free lessons with like real teachers.
Oh, gosh.
So not online teaching, but is that something you normally have issues with in terms of the
Um,
Celta, like finding students who are willing
yeah,
to
if
be guinea pigs?
yeah, when it's face to face, it's harder because they have to take time off to come in, and the teaching practice will be mid-afternoon or something. So, if they've got childcare or they're studying or they're working, it's kind of an awkward time for them. So, yeah, we might have 15 students signed up and then 6 turned up. Um, so, yeah, in face to face, that was always a worry for us. But with online, we haven't had to worry about that. We've got the students connecting from all over the place. So,
Right.
yeah.
It's also when the students join. I'm teaching online now with my students, and that they don't like having their cameras on,
Right.
and they don't like having their microphones on if they're not speaking and that kind of
Mhm.
thing. And I remember when I was doing the CELTA, one big thing that we were encouraged to do was build rapport with the students.
Yeah.
Do those limitations or that reluctance to have the cameras and the
Mhm.
microphones on, does that affect that ability to build rapport for the trainees?
Um, yes, I would say so, but in the same way, it affects, teachers who are trained. Um,
Mm,
I think online building a rapport is you do have to take a bit more time to do it. It doesn't come as naturally as it might in a face-to-face situation. Um, so, I mean, I try to give them a little bit of time to do like an icebreaker and get to know the students just a little bit. Um, they also have a, a benefit, which one of my trainees said yesterday. You don't have to learn their names because the names come up on the screen. And I was like, yeah, that's true. I mean, that's one way to help build rapport. You can see their name, and um, when it comes to like turning on and off the camera, I try to ask students to turn on their camera. When I'm teaching, I always try to get them to, just because, I don't know necessarily if they're paying attention. And when
mm,
you're trying to get their attention, I think every teacher is different about this, though, whether students should have their cameras on or off. Um, I'm definitely a stickler for keeping the cameras on if they can. If it's going to affect their connection, we can't
mm,
understand them, for example, then sure they can turn off their camera. But no, I try to ask them to put their cameras on, just so we can see. And there's a lot of, because online teaching, you don't get as many visual clues if someone understands, like on face to face, if someone understands something, you kind of see it on their face, they're nodding or they're, smiling.
mm,
So these non-visual cues. And I think that can really help you to see, especially if you've got a class of 15 students. You can just glance across, the different screens and see, okay, this person, they're not responding, but they're nodding along, smiling. They don't look lost. They're following.
mm.
Um, and I think if you don't have that, then it can slow down the pace of the lesson because you're constantly like, "Oh, Rob, did you understand? Mark, did you understand? Matt, did you understand?" There's a lot more of that, and it can slow down the lesson a bit, I think.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So in your email to us, Helen, you mentioned that the teachers with more experience were a bit more kind of reticent to make changes or kind of struggling to make changes.
Hmm.
Does that relate to the student teachers, or does that relate to your colleagues? Or
Both, I'd say. Yeah.
okay.
I
What
think
kind of what? How does that kind of manifest itself?
Yeah, I think, well, like for the reasons I was saying, I think a lot of experienced teachers, and myself included, when you're so used to the face-to-face interactions and you've using certain activities and things, like I know some of my colleagues in particular, who are English teachers, who've been teaching for 10, 15 years, they were struggling with, I have to change my activities. I can't just do the mingle activities that I normally do, and I can't do the
Yeah,
board games that I usually do, and um, things like that. They really had to adapt, and um, I think they found it really, really difficult to change those things. And I mean, as I said, you can still do a lot of these things. You just have to adapt how you do them. So, for example, at a board game, you could still play. You just have to share your screen, and you have to make sure that you have adapted the game that you've got, um, and then use the annotation tools to, note what's been done and where people are on the game.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but if you're not tech savvy, then it's a lot harder to get there on your own. You know.
yeah. I see.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Does that answer your
I guess.
question?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I guess just like one question for me that came up then. So obviously the trainee teachers need to be assessed in some way, but how flexible has the Celta kind of, I don't know how much you know about the way that the, I guess, a Celta invigilator kind of comes
Mm.
in.
Yeah. Mhm.
How flexible is their assessment kind of criteria with this new
Um,
way of doing
right.
things?
I mean, they're coming in just to see that, um, you know, the assessors who come are coming to look and see that it's standardization, basically. Like, are we fitting the Cambridge standards still, even if we're online?
Yeah,
And I think they're flexible in terms of like how we do it. And every center is different, even in face to face, the way you do things or the way the order in which you give the trainees information and the order they do the assignments. Every center is going to do them differently, regardless of online or face to face. So yeah, the assessor is just looking to see, are we are we as trainers looking for the right things, and are we getting them to the right place? Are we assessing them to the right level? If I say this lesson is too standard, or this lesson is a pass lesson, they're going to say, like, they're going to basically, like, are you sure that's a pass lesson, or do you think that is a fail? So they're really there to standardize, and it doesn't matter whether it is face to face, online, or how we're doing it. So yeah, there's flexibility in the procedure of it, for sure. Yeah.
Hi, Helen. One question I always like to ask of any teacher trainer
Mhm.
is how you. There's often people talk about how there are no teacher trainer trainers. So how did you develop your skills as a teacher trainer?
Right. Well, I'm very fortunate. In the center that I work in, my colleagues and my boss are certified to do that. So,
They
in
are
my
teacher
experience,
trainer
I'm just
trainers.
lucky. Yeah.
Okay,
Um,
wow, great.
yeah. Yeah. It's true. There are fewer than. It's the same with like Delta. I don't know if any. I'm sure some of you
Mm,
have done Delta or know about Delta.
I think we've
There aren't that
all,
as many
yeah.
Delta trainers or Delta assessors.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so you had sort of official
Yeah. I was
trainer
lucky.
training.
I was
Mm,
lucky.
great. Okay. Looks like maybe Mark has a question.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, it's going back to the camera issue.
Mhm.
Certainly, it's something that I've found quite difficult in my own teaching as well.
Mm.
But it's kind of it's a bit of a weird situation because it's like students are kind of inviting you into their homes, and
Mm.
perhaps not all of the family members are keen to have a bunch of teachers and
Mm.
other students kind of essentially visiting their home situation. So how can you kind of deal with the camera issue, do you think, while kind of maintaining kind of the ease of communication when we have a sort of face-to-face kind of thing going on, and kind of reconciling that with the kind of the need for some level of privacy for some students?
Mm. Mhm. Um, that's interesting. So I do teacher training, but I'm also just a regular teacher, and the students that I have, I mean, they're sometimes in bed. They don't seem to worry about privacy. Um, so I would say it's something to put at the beginning of if you're running a course, for example, say you were teaching for a 3-4 week course. I think it would be part of the course expectations. I think it's something you have to address with the students at the beginning of the course, and explain to them, if you want to be, you don't want your family involved, of course, perhaps sit facing with a wall behind you, or go to a friend's house. I know some of my students have done that before, and that can really help you to address that problem. And I think just be sensitive to the students as well, like understand their situation. Are they living by themselves? Are they living with a large family? Are they, staying abroad with friends? And help them. You can guide them individually if it's not a huge class, and give them suggestions of where they could go. I think just as long as you're respectful, but you lay out at the beginning of the course what you expect. I expect to see your face every day, even if you're not on, your camera isn't on the whole lesson. I think that's clear expectations, but in a respectful way. That's what I
Thanks
would
very
say.
much.
Yeah, does that answer your question,
It
Matthew?
does. It does. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
Not a question really, but just sort of a comment on
Yeah.
the camera issue, which is something that surprised me about online teaching. Was I sort of expected not to get to know my students as well as I do as teaching them in the classroom.
Mhm.
Um, Mainly, not having the chance to have sort of more informal chats with them.
Mhm.
I know some teachers, some of my colleagues where I work now, they'll sort of tell students, I'll be here for sort of coffee chat for the 20 minutes after the lesson finishes, and some students take them up on that, but that's not something I do.
Mm.
But one area where I feel like we do get to know, and their classmates do get to know um, their peers better, is that sort of little peek into their home life, and obviously with students who are comfortable with it. But for example, I know a lot of my students' pets and their pets' names, because
Yeah.
cats will jump up on laps,
I always
and
have a pet lesson. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Um, so there are, some of those little ways that we can sort of know
Yeah.
our students a little
And I
bit
think you
better.
can even use that in teaching if your students are comfortable
Mm,
with it. I did um, with an elementary class, I did a scavenger hunt and I gave them a list of items in the house they had to run and find, um,
mm,
which was quite fun. And
mhm,
got to see some of their kitchens and things like that, which was nice. I know that the school I work at, they do activities and things where they do like cooking, and
mm,
they work through recipes together and things like that. So
mhm.
as long as your students are, you know, they're up for it, then yeah, it's you can definitely get to know your students that way for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I imagine we'll be, over the next few months, or I'm sure they're out there already, but lots of very innovative ways of using Zoom and
Mhm.
these kind of lessons.
I've noticed there's a lot of just resources and information just popping up on all of the circles that I'm looking at on, online of
Mm,
there's so many resources that I just didn't know about. I don't know if they've existed for a long time or if or if they've just appeared, in this year. Um, so yeah, I think it's gonna develop, and I think whether we go to face or continue online for a while, I think there's going to be a lot more resources coming out or being known to teachers. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Could I
I
could I
think,
ask you a question?
of course, yeah, or
Um,
any of us, yeah.
yeah, well, I guess for anyone really. So
Hmm.
I just want to know in regards to resources, how you've been finding that. Like, have you been by yourselves in navigating resources, or have your schools provided you with resources, like textbooks
What
and things like that?
textbooks?
Yeah.
Um, I'll just answer very quickly.
Yeah.
I started working at a new university from this April, which is the start of the academic year here in
Hmm.
Japan. Um, and yeah, I was given a textbook basically to use in my courses, but with, I think, the common um, explanation, which was that I could use it as much or as little as I wanted,
Hmm.
with the understanding that all the students had to buy it. So
Hmm.
if I didn't
Okay.
use it at all, then they'd feel like
Was there an e-copy of it, or was it just a physical copy?
there Actually, this particular book, there wasn't an e-copy. I was told the publisher, which is Oxford, said that we could. I'm not sure why there wasn't an e-copy, but we could photocopy, um, make digital copies,
Right.
just
Okay.
just
Yeah,
from
you
a
could scan it
copier.
in and use it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, for students in the first few weeks who didn't have the book yet.
Yeah, it makes it
Yeah,
so much more. I just find like sharing your screen and being able to show them the activity helps so much.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Actually, I teach part-time at another university, and there I did have an ebook,
Okay.
and being able to use that was really useful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're really helpful. Yeah.
Mm.
Okay.
Saurabh, would
Hi,
you like to
Helen.
say something? Yeah.
Thank you so much for your wonderful contribution. It was pleasure, listening to your experience. However, answering to your question, there's a Facebook group called Pandemic Pedagogy. I
Mm-hmm.
know it sounds really, really, witty and funny, the name of the group,
Yeah.
but it's really, really helpful. As Matt also mentioned that he has just started teaching at a newer university. Some institutions provide books,
Mm.
and the other auxiliary supports or the other pedagogical insights you can definitely find if you join that particular group, because that group consists of thousands of teachers around the world, and they keep on sharing whatever interesting and great resources they come across, just to
Mm.
uh, just to help other teachers around the world.
That's really nice. I
So
think
just
that's
take
something that's
time.
also good.
Yes.
Yeah. That's come out of all this is we're connecting with people around the world and getting resources from each other and working a bit more collaboratively, which I like too. That's really cool. Thanks.
Yeah, happy to help. Thanks.
Mark.
I think that this is again just a comment similar to Saurabh's as well, where I think it's going to be like a kind of golden age for teacher produced materials, because I think quite a lot of teachers are in the same position, and it's certainly a lot easier to work as somebody producing materials small scale and get a quick turnaround than it is for a publishing company to kind of change a whole scale of
Yeah.
operations.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, another possibility could be that some teacher is designing some kind of a teaching artifact or some kind of an exercise, and put it on pandemic pedagogy or similar groups, and they can get instant feedbacks, especially if it is catered to online teaching. So before they get to have a possibility of getting their teaching artifacts published, people give a lot of feedback that what worked, what did not work, what worked immensely, and how they can further connect it to the theories, and then have a foolproof um, publication out of it. you know so I think it goes long way. I mean, this pandemic has also created, I mean, it's, of course, one of the greatest unfortunate instances in in for us, basically, for this century, and I hope this is the last one. But it also has created a good community space for teachers around the world who can come and share their vulnerabilities or what worked in their classroom at the same time.
Really agree with you. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Light at the end of the tunnel.
Okay. Thank you very much, Helen.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, that was really interesting, and it's really great to hear your perspective and your experiences.
Yeah.
Um, I think what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to one of our.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode. The next episode will be out next week, where we engage in a more free-form discussion with our guests and with our listeners about the topic of improvisation. So, we'll see you all then.